Welcome to Power of Kindness, a Tao radio production brought to you by Touchlife Foundation. My name is Allie, and I'm joined, as always, by my wonderful co-host, Priyanka. And this week, we are talking to Avinoam. So check out the recording.
A very warm welcome to all the listeners out there to the Power of Kindness show. Today, I'm Priyanka, and my co-host Ali are very happy and pleased to have our special guest on the show with us today, Avinoam, who is a senior product manager at LinkedIn and is based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. So welcome, Avinoam. Thank you for your time today. It was a pleasure meeting you sometime last year, and since then, I have followed you on social media, on LinkedIn specifically, and through that, I have been truly inspired because some of the content that you have been posting on a day-to-day basis, that has been really inspiring. And to all the listeners and viewers, this is something you'll get snippets of in the rest of our conversation today. So before getting into all this, one interesting thing, Avinoam, that you brought up during our earlier conversation was about your name. So it feels like you were born to be on this show with us today. So do you want to share with the audience more about that fun fact you shared about your name?
Sure. And I'll just, the disclosure is it's just a fun fact. It's not my proclamation to this is who I am. That's for me to prove. But the rather literal meaning of my name in Hebrew is it's two names. It's Avi and Noam. Avi means father of, Noam means kindness. Again, not to say that that's my role or something like that, but I feel that has probably subconsciously guided me from a young age.
Oh, that's really very nice. Very apt. So kindness, yep, that's in your name. That's who you are. And I think that's what we'll talk about a bit. So let's begin maybe by a very broad question, as you know, what our title of the show is, and connecting it to you. What does the power of kindness mean for you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think like we spoke last time, I guess like my working hypothesis in the world. So I'll give it like two backgrounds. One is I grew up Jewish religious until I was 17. And when I was about 17, I decided to take off my yarmulke, which is like a thing you put on your head. Mm-hmm. And it was a scary moment because I think for a lot of people who become secular, there's that moment where you fear like lightning will strike you in that moment in time. Mm-hmm. But the guiding question or like the principle, almost like as a PM, you should have like a very specific question you can ask yourself, like a little test. Mm-hmm. So my test was like, do I think I'm a good person? Okay. If I take it off and if I change my so-called ways? And the answer to myself was yes. And that's been my guiding principle, I guess, along everything. I think that's one aspect. I think another aspect is, I think it comes off pretty obvious. Like I'm very interested in self-improvement books and people, and I follow Mo Gaudat, who wrote Solve for Happy, and I'm reading now like I think I'm saying his name right. I think it's Brian Gilbert, like Stumbling on Happiness. Mm-hmm. It's a topic I found fascinating. My very humble working hypothesis is that I think the number one priority right now being presented is happiness, mm-hmm. which is admirable, by the way, and it's amazing. But it kind of feels that potentially the priority above that should be kindness, like being a good person to yourself, to others, because of like potential causal relationship where I think right now the working notion is that if you need to be happy to make room to be kind. But it seems really interesting. Like if you look at religions, if you look at research, it's usually kindness, it's usually giving that actually makes room to being happy. So
very well said, Avinoam. I think you're saying there's a priority, a hierarchy of sorts, and then kindness comes above happiness. But happiness is what people usually go for too. But you're saying that kindness plays a more crucial role. Very well said.
It also goes to the philosophy that by giving back to someone, you're not necessarily just serving them, you're also serving yourself and your own purpose. And when you feel fulfilled, that's how you find happiness and joy in the world.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Very selfish act.
It is, but that's how the world goes around. if we can all be that level of selfishness, I think that we'd be all in a better place.
Yeah, definitely agreed. Yeah, I think the thing that got me thinking about it is, so again, like somebody I admire, I mentioned it before, is Mo Gaudat.
Mhm.
Amazing story on so many levels, and his mission of like 1 billion happy is just the way he's approaching it, and it's such a cool story. I think that's what sparked a lot of the thinking, and then asking like, what's really cool is like he's got this amazing overlap of like spirituality, um, analytical thinking, and like I've never seen anybody bring it together so well.
Mhm.
Um, but I guess from that same perspective of like asking like, what is the ultimate problem to solve for?
Mhm.
Like in my mind, I've been walking around for a while thinking like, maybe there should be another movement called like 1 billion kind or 1 billion good or something like that. Um, but yeah, I think that's been like something that's been brewing from a very young age.
I was going to ask you about that because you have kind of come to this philosophy and you're seeking out books on kindness and you're seeking out different ideas, and it's obviously a subject that you're very well versed in. Throughout your life, were there any moments or certain people that kind of pushed you in that direction that when you go back and you look at your journey, you're like, this is the kind of the catalyst to pursuing happiness and kindness in your life?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think, not to sound too cliche, right? Like, so the environment I grew up in wasn't like ultra orthodox. It was orthodox in a like religious in a um, mild way. I don't know how to call it, like very liberal still.
Mhm.
Um, but still, like a lot of my friends went through the same thing. It's pretty common actually, especially in Israel. Um, you go through the army, you go through different things, you're exposed to the world, and it makes you think. And it was interesting to see how certain friends and like different families, it felt like the response they were getting from their families was like, what you're doing is unacceptable. And again, going back to priorities, it felt like the priority there was to live out a certain way of life where the religion or like whatever you believe in, like that belief with all the external um, parts of it and ceremonies are higher than essentially what it's trying to teach you to do in life. And I think something that my parents have done really well. So we're four siblings. All four of us are now secular.
Mhm.
Um, so I've definitely been influenced. But my parents never, ever gave any one of us a hard time about it. I was never told, don't do it. I was never told what you're doing is a mistake. Um, and they never said it in such words, but it was obvious that what they cared about more and what they still care about more is that no matter what you do is, you know, be a decent human being to yourself, to others, be kind. And they lead by example. They're extremely kind. They're extremely welcoming. And I think it's sometimes it's the things that aren't said, right? It's the actions that they take. When you do something that's major and you notice that it didn't matter anything, you understand what the hierarchy of principles really is. And when you're met with the exact amount of love that you were before, you understand what's important and what's not. And I think that action, that decision, and seeing like the lack of reaction on one hand, made it very clear to understand like A, this is what my parents like stand for in their education. But B, when you see that, it also made me feel like growing up religious, like there's so many beautiful things in every religion, and a lot of them revolve around like exactly this topic, right? They don't necessarily talk about happiness. They talk about fulfillment, sense of purpose, belonging, and all those things stem from this notion of can't do any of those things if you're not kind. You're not going to belong to anything. So I think that's where it also connected to the religion. I said, like, if there's one thing I need to take from this whole story, everything I've learned, like all the morning prayers, all these things. Um, and again, like it goes back to like there's this story from the Bible. Or I forget who asked who, like, can you tell me the entire Bible or the Torah in Hebrew, like on one foot? or in other words, in one sentence.
Mhm.
And the sentence is love thy neighbor.
Mm.
Essentially, that's what it breaks down to. So I think, I don't know, you spend years going through hearing a lot of things, but it's interesting how like one thing can stick. And I think it's for a reason.
Yep, and I think a lot of things that you said sort of resonate with us as well. I think the one is really as how parents, you can really lead by example. And I also see you doing that in your daily life. There's a lot of things that, you know, you're helping inculcate into your kids from a kindness perspective, just being aware of perspectives. There were just so many interesting stories that I've read. Is there any that you would like to just share about how that kindness leading by example is something that's very important for kids today?
Yeah. I mean, we've definitely got a ways to go, right? Like our kids are very young and it's a lifelong journey. So
Mhm.
I will never declare any kind of like victory. I don't think it exists. But I can say is like, we know that we try our very best. We don't always succeed, but we always go back and do our best again. Um, I think an example, and like this is where I give a lot of credit to my wife. She's very generous and she like overdoes things when it comes to being kind.
Mhm.
But I think places where we want to see the kids like be part of it with us. Like I have a specific example, and then I think there's like one of the posts that I shared a while ago where like it's a really good example of how it came to life through my son. So when this whole stay-at-home thing, like shelter-in-place thing, started, um, you know, my parents are in their mid to late 70s,
Mhm.
and they're in Israel, and they can't get together with all the grandchildren, right, for obvious reasons.
Mhm.
And I was thinking about them, but then all of a sudden, when this literally on the first or second day of shelter in place, my wife, I saw her sitting next to the printer and she's like printing out pages and she's cutting up things and she's like formatting. And I said, "What are you doing? Like, what are you printing for? We're home." And she prepared these little block notes that were the size, like small enough to put into mailboxes
Mhm.
for all of the neighbors that live in houses in our neighborhood that we know are
Mhm.
very elderly. And she wrote down our names, our phone numbers, a picture of us. This is who we are. This is where we live. Call us anytime. We're happy to like give you groceries and everything. But instead of just going by herself and doing something, she made it a family thing. We
Mhm.
walked around the block. The kids put the stuff inside the mailbox
Mhm.
and we knocked on the doors, letting them know and like introducing ourselves. And we put the kids standing in front of us.
Mhm.
Um, and it was beautiful to watch. And like the story from my son's perspective, which I think resonated the most if I have to like look at everything I've written. It's a very simple story, but at the time he was like 5 years old, and I found it really interesting.
Mhm.
So he basically picked up a flower from our backyard, and he came up to my wife, and you know I was sitting in a situation where I saw his back, and he had his hands behind his back, hiding the flower. And he told her, pick a hand, and she chose the wrong hand, so to speak. But instead of like being right about it and showing her the empty hand, I saw him switch hands behind his back
Mhm.
and give her the flower. And it was such a simple moment, and she didn't know it, and he never told her about it. And I think that's the beauty of being kind. Like he didn't do it to say like, "Look at what I did." He did it, you know, behind his back in the sweetest way possible. And I called it out to my wife afterwards, and I actually sat down with him afterwards and I shared, and I told him I saw what you did there, and he was so cute. He blushed about it because he was aware. But I think the implicit part of it is the humility that's built into kindness, because it's not an extravagant thing, right? Like it forces you to be like as most human as you can be, I guess, like eye level. So that was a very long answer to your question.
No, but it was
It
a
was a
beautiful.
beautiful
Hey, yeah,
answer.
go ahead.
Exactly.
Mm.
And I think it's also so important right now in the times that we're living in. You hear a lot of talk about how, you know, hate is a taught reaction and that fear is a taught reaction. There's a lot of rhetoric online in the news about how, you know, parents, you need to work with your children to teach them, you know, not to hate, not to fear, not to go against people who are different than you. But nobody talks about the flip side, actually teaching kindness by example, and how that's kind of the more natural course for humans. Like you said, it's kind of at a base level how humans survive and interact and kind of find purpose is through those acts of kindness.
Yeah.
Yep, and I think just doing that simple deed, like you said, around your own neighborhood, although it may seem small, but for some, it can be a life-changing moment as well. So I think kudos to you and your family for that, taking that initiative. I think a lot of us sometimes read online and then we talk about it, but we don't really action on it. So I think that's something that's really very credible, very good, that you guys actually took that effort, initiative to do. So that's really good. And I think on that note, also, when I read online, there was a lot of times people are very easy in expressing the emotions or emotionally connecting with someone. Giving sympathy is very easy, but then you want to develop the empathy aspect, right? So just instead of just, oh, she fell down or he has difficulties, that's sad. You feel sad for that person, but then you want to develop that empathy. You want to take it a step forward. So I did come across another story from you actually about when your daughter actually fell down on her bicycle, and then at that time, she was in pain, and because when you had just come back from the cycling activity, you had told your son and your daughter clean up because they had come from outside, and in fact, your son said, no, let's wait. He actually consoled your daughter, took good care of her, and then they did the cleanup. So that when I read it, I was humbled because it's such a simple act. It may feel like he's defying you, but that was not actually the case. What you expressed from his point of view was, he said at that moment, his sister was feeling sad and hurt. So why should we add that additional pressure? Why should we really make things even more difficult? That was the empathy angle that came in, and then taking a step back after that, then they cleaned up. So I think that was really, it's so sweet. It just sometimes makes me feel, as I'm growing up, have I lost all these simple traits that young kids have nowadays?
Yeah. It's I think it goes back also, again, like I feel like I keep on going back to the PM angle of things, but it's almost like being in a work situation where you think that the right solution to move forward with something is X, and then somebody comes up and challenges your priority. They're not challenging you. And then you're like, actually, you're right. It's not the right priority. And I think what's really cool to see, and I think what comes out beautifully in kids because of their innocence, and like they're not like, they haven't gotten to that stage yet where they have to like relearn everything from their kids, hopefully. But like it was so clear to them what the priority is. And what's beautiful about kids, and what comes up time and time and time and time again, um, I guess because it's so pure in most cases,
Mm-hmm.
like that's where it comes up. Like their priority is, um, like the priority was to do the right thing, right? He saw she was sad and that she just needed somebody to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And as a dad, I'm busy thinking about like, let's get home and make sure we clean up the wound, like very operational.
Mm-hmm.
But he really went into like the emotional pain point, right? Like she's in distress. And before like healing the wound, she needs to heal um, like her wounded emotion. And at that point in time, she was just sad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, it is humbling when they do these things and you're like, why didn't I think of that? But there's something really interesting. As I joined LinkedIn recently, like I've been listening a lot more to the previous CEO, Jeff Weiner, talk about compassion. He seems to be a guru on the topic, and I'm probably misrepresenting this, so I apologize in advance. But he had such a beautiful distinction between, like, I've always thought about the distinction between sympathy and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sympathy is looking at something with your arms crossed, saying, "That's gotta suck," and empathy is like talking about it or helping you.
Mm-hmm.
But he had this beautiful distinction where essentially, like, compassion is empathy plus an action.
Mm.
And I think it defined it so well. And I think that's the difference between my son empathizing with my daughter in the moment and him being compassionate towards her. Like, he took the action of walking her home. He took the action of lifting her scooter. I was empathetic. I understood her pain, but I wanted her to get home and clean up her knees.
Mhm.
Um, but he was compassionate, so he outdid me for sure.
Wow, so
That's
that's
such an
like,
interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Priyanka.
so wow, that's such an interesting angle or perspective. We took it like another level ahead. We began with talking about sympathy, and then we went in to talk about empathy, and then now we're actually talking about compassion, because everything needs an additional layer. That's very well said.
I found it super interesting when I heard it, and as like obvious as these terms seem, it's really fascinating how you can take like single words and just provide an additional layer, and they become transformative.
It's true. There are certain things we learn about them throughout our lives, but there is a certain moment of clarity, I think, that as we kind of go through this journey where we're like, okay, now we get it, hopefully. That's the hope, that we all eventually have that light bulb moment where we're like, okay, this is it. Compassion. Yes, I understand now what that means, and now I have the ability to act on it.
Totally. And like recall on the like be able to be in a situation and like use it to ask yourself questions, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
am I putting myself in that person's shoes, and am I doing something to help them?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I just putting myself in their shoes?
Mm-hmm. And isn't it fascinating that it takes children to kind of hold up that mirror to you to make you question those?
It is, I mean, I'm sure so many people know it obviously because they have kids. And like a lot of these happiness experts talk about it. Like how it's just ingrained into what they do, right? Like obviously they're very present, they laugh a ton, they don't take themselves too seriously, they don't dwell on like what went wrong, they don't dwell on what went right either. They just move on. And
Mm-hmm.
but it's been really interesting. Like I feel that was the first angle, but then it became a lot more interesting seeing how kindness is a default as well, right? Like, and it's not always like that. Like they definitely bicker and fight and all these things, and it's not all roses. But when they do it, it's, I don't know, there's something idealistic about it that you wish you could capture, and it's free of any preconception. What will somebody say? What will somebody think? They're just in there and they're doing something so pure. Um, and I feel like that's the thing that we try to celebrate as much as possible. More than achievements, more than so many other things. It's like if they've had like a good observation, if they were super kind, or if they're extending themselves or their time for someone or something else, um, that's where we'll try. We won't always succeed, but that's where we try to like really make a big deal out of it. And they feel that.
So we are actually close to our time, but is there any last thoughts on kindness, on children, on the state of the world that you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I think by the way, after speaking with you, I was inspired to like do a little bit of a pun or like a word play. I don't know if you saw it, but it was kind of cheesy. It was like, I think it was happy me makes me kind. And
Mm-hmm.
then I thought if you read it backwards, it's kind me makes me happy.
Ooh.
And I think the main thing or like message I would love to, I don't know, even if there's one person that listens to this besides you, that's enough, is I feel like what's um, galvanizing for me as I grow up and see my kids grow up and all these things, and especially what's going on in the world. Again, it feels like there's a cause and effect and like a certain priority or hierarchy of things, which is I don't like skipping to happiness from everything that's going on now seems like you're missing how to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, happiness is where you want to get to. It's obvious why everybody wants to be happy, but then there's a gap there of like, how do you become happy? Just say, I'm going to be happy now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are all these different tactics, but it feels like the most obvious, most actionable thing, which is ridiculously selfish, like really, 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 really selfish, that just works, is just trying to be a good human being. And it can be in the smallest things. Like, it's so I really think I'm trying to practice it, and I've been noticing, like, if I want to feel happy, then I'll ask myself. It's always about like the key question you can ask yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not feeling happy about something, if I'm feeling a little down, instead of saying like, why am I upset?
Mm-hmm.
It's asking the question like, have I done something nice for somebody else recently?
Mm.
Usually when I have, I don't need to ask myself, why am I feeling down? Because it feels pretty amazing.
Right.
But I think the cool thing is, like, everyone has something to give someone, and it doesn't have to be something like a grand gesture. It could be going across to your neighbor, like ridiculously local.
Mm-hmm.
It could be calling up a friend to see how they're feeling. It could be meeting a stranger on LinkedIn and jumping on a 15-minute call, which I've become worse and worse at over time. But I don't know. And I think for me, like, what's been really interesting about my personal use of LinkedIn during this, since shelter in place started, is I never really wrote about this, but it's actually therapeutic and it's selfish. Because when this whole thing started, my anxiety level went up, and I'm a hypochondriac.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, like, if I can spread positivity and like some level of kindness,
Mm-hmm.
that'll help me. But in turn, it's been getting like, I've been getting good feedback from people. It's spawned good conversations. And then I want to do it more and more. And I found myself speaking with people who are graduating, people who've been laid off, all these things I wouldn't have thought of doing. So I've gotten to this virtuous cycle, and it wasn't about what can I do to, I want to be happy. I need to just think happy.
Mm-hmm.
It was something very actionable, and LinkedIn was this magnificent, or still is, an amazing vehicle to do that, which again is very much, it started about me, but then it became about others. Sometimes it's a one-off conversation, sometimes it spreads out. But yeah, to summarize, I'd say I really believe that, like, if we want to be happy, we should ask ourselves the question, like, have I been kind recently? And it's really easy to find ways to be kind, but it's very hard to find ways to be happy unless you're being kind, I guess.
It
Well,
goes back to the whole saying, you can't help everyone, but you can help someone. And it's, by having that act of helping someone, you're helping yourself. It's beautiful.
Yeah,
So
I like that.
well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you talking to us from, strangers on LinkedIn and giving us your time.
I am very excited, and I'm super, really humbled that you reached out to me about this. I'm not an expert. I'm no one. But honestly, it may sound funny. Like, this is, I think, a dream come true, right? Like, I think we always talk about dream come trues as like the obvious things. I don't know, winning the lottery, working at a company. For me, it's being able to share a message and like actually having two people at least who want to hear me talk about something that I'm super passionate about. So thank you for making a dream come true.
Well, thank you, Avinoam. It was a pleasure. Thank you for joining us this week on Power of Kindness, a TAL radio show powered by Touch a Life Foundation. It has been a pleasure speaking with Avinoam about the interlink of happiness and kindness. On this note, do follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn at TAL Giving. That's TAL Giving. Or visit our website at touchalife.org and listen to other shows to get inspired and motivated. Stay tuned to next week's Power of Kindness show by Touch a Life Foundation. Remember, one act of kindness can make a difference. My name is Priyanka, and together with my wonderful co-host Ali, we will see you next week.